Welcome to Into the Paradox, the show that digs into the hidden contradictions at the heart of human experience. I'm your host, Peter Kennedy, and today we're navigating a terrain that's as fascinating as it is unsettling, the notion that every mind occupies a spectrum, and whether the harmless little earworm that gets stuck in your head might have any connection, however faint, to the far more serious phenomenon of schizophrenia. Our guest is none other than Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, clinical psychologist, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, and author of 12 Rules for Life and Maps of Meaning. Jordan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Peter. It's good to be here.
Jordan, before we get to earworms and psychosis, let's talk about this idea of being on a spectrum. In popular discourse, we hear a lot about neurodiversity, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, being placed on a continuum rather than as binary categories. Do you think this framing applies to mental health more broadly?
Absolutely, and it's a point where both clinical practice and philosophy intersect. The traditional DSM framework, for all its utility, tends to carve the mind into discrete boxes. You have depression or you don't. You have schizophrenia or you don't. That approach is useful for insurance billing and for ensuring that we have a common language, but it obscures the reality that the brain's functional architecture is fundamentally continuous. Think of a violin string. When you press down gently, you get a soft, low note. Press harder, you get a higher pitch. Press so hard that the string snaps and you lose the instrument altogether. Similarly, traits like anxiety, attention, and perceptual integration exist on a sliding scale. Most people hover in the middle, what we might call the normative range, but the borders are fuzzy, and small shifts can have disproportionate effects. From a psychobiological perspective, the brain's reward prediction error system, the default mode network, and the thalamocortical relay are all subject to stochastic fluctuations. Those fluctuations, combined with genetic predispositions and environmental stressors, can push a person toward or away from a clinical threshold. So yes, the spectrum metaphor captures something essential about mental health. It's not a set of on-off switches, but a series of gradients that can be nudged, amplified, or attenuated. The paradox, of course, is that while we speak of a spectrum, the lived experience of crossing that line can feel binary. One moment you're functional, the next you're lost in delusion.
That's a powerful image. It also resonates with the idea that we each have the capacity to move toward greater integration or toward fragmentation, depending on habits, relationships, and meaning-making. Your own work on hierarchies and narrative suggests that we constantly negotiate those limits.
Exactly. The stories we tell ourselves are the scaffolding that keep the brain's chaotic potential in check. When those stories deteriorate, you get the kind of disintegration we see in psychosis.
Speaking of repetitive intrusions, let's talk about earworms. Those melodic loops that get stuck in our heads, sometimes for a few seconds, sometimes for hours. On the surface, they're harmless, even amusing. Some research even suggests they can improve mood or aid memory consolidation. But a number of listeners have asked whether there's a link between these persistent auditory loops and more severe conditions like schizophrenia, where auditory hallucinations are a hallmark.
There are a few layers to peel back here. First, earworms, what we might more formally call involuntary musical imagery, INMI, are a type of spontaneous, internally generated auditory experience. Neuroscientifically, they appear to involve the auditory cortex, the ventral striatum, and the default mode network. The same circuitry is implicated when we recall a memory or imagine a future scenario. Second, the distinction between a benign INMI and a pathological hallucination is largely one of agency and control. When an earworm pops up, you recognize it as your own mind replaying a song you've heard. You can, with effort, shift your attention, replace it with a different tune, or simply let it fade. In schizophrenia, the auditory experience is experienced as external. The voice is not your own, and it often carries imperative or accusatory content. The sense of ownership is lost. That said, there are some interesting findings. A 2021 study in Frontiers in Psychology examined a cohort of individuals with high schizotypy, people who score higher on traits associated with psychosis without meeting diagnostic criteria. They reported a higher frequency of involuntary musical imagery, and the earworms tended to be more emotionally charged, sometimes even negative or ominous. What does that tell us? It suggests that the same neural networks that generate an earworm can become dysregulated. When the brain's predictive coding fails, when the system cannot properly filter out internally generated noise, what once was a harmless loop can be reinterpreted as an external, threatening voice. Importantly, we must not conflate correlation with causation. An earworm does not cause schizophrenia, and most people with earworms never develop a psychotic disorder. However, the presence of frequent intrusive INMI might be a soft indicator of an underlying hyperreactivity in the auditory prediction machinery, one that under stress or neurochemical imbalance could tip over into hallucination.
So if I'm hearing that pop song over and over again, it's a sign my brain is doing its usual predictive work. But if it starts to feel like a voice commenting on my actions, that's when the alarm bells should ring.
Precisely. The subjective quality of the experience, whether you label it song or voice, is the crucial discriminant.
Let's delve deeper into schizophrenia itself. The DSM-5 describes it as a disorder of reality testing, with positive symptoms hallucinations, delusions, and negative symptoms flattened affect, avolition. From your clinical perspective, how does this relate to the spectrum idea we discussed earlier?
The predictive coding framework provides a useful lens. The brain constantly generates top-down predictions about sensory input and compares them to bottom-up data. Prediction errors, are then used to update the model. In a healthy mind, there's a balance. Cohesive multiple. The model is flexible enough to incorporate new information, but stable enough to avoid chaos. In schizophrenia, that balance is disrupted. The weighting of prediction errors becomes amplified, especially in the auditory domain. This hypersensitivity can lead the brain to treat internally generated thoughts as external sensory data. The result is auditory hallucination, what feels like a voice speaking from the outside. Neurochemically, dopamine dysregulation is central. Dopamine signals salience the importance of a stimulus. In schizophrenia, dopamine may assign excessive salience to internally generated noise, turning an earworm-type loop into a commanding voice. At the same time, glutamatergic dysfunction in the thalamocortical circuitry impairs the brain's ability to filter out irrelevant internal chatter. From a psychological standpoint, the loss of a coherent narrative, what we might call a collapsed story, means the individual can't anchor these experiences within a meaningful context. The paradox is that the mind is both overengaged, seeing significance everywhere, and underengaged, unable to weave those significances into a story. Therapeutically, we try to restore the hierarchy, strengthen top-down narrative control, reduce the salience of random noise, and rebuild meaning through relationships, work, and responsibility.
That aligns with your earlier emphasis on taking responsibility and structuring one's life as a bulwark against chaos. It seems that the same mechanisms that keep us grounded can be eroded, leading to that collapse.
Exactly. The paradox is that the same brain architecture that lets us enjoy a catchy melody also makes us vulnerable to pathological misinterpretations when the hierarchy is compromised.
We've covered a lot of theory. Let's bring it back to the listeners. What can someone do day to day to stay on the healthy side of the spectrum and keep earworms from turning into something more sinister?
First, awareness. Notice when an earworm becomes persistent and emotionally charged. If you find yourself ruminating on it, label it. I'm hearing a song in my head. That simple act of naming reestablishes ownership. Second, structure. A regular routine, sleep, nutrition, exercise helps the brain maintain stable predictive models. Sleep especially consolidates memories and clears the brain of excess neural noise. Inadequate sleep is a known risk factor for psychotic exacerbation. Third, meaningful engagement. Work, creative projects, or volunteer activities provide external goals that anchor internal experience. When you have a clear hierarchical goal, the brain's top-down predictions become stronger and random auditory loops lose their salience. Fourth, social connection. Interpersonal dialogue offers reality testing. If you're hearing a voice that tells you something you can't explain, a trusted friend or therapist can help you evaluate whether that experience is internally generated or if it signifies something deeper. Fifth, mind-body practices. Meditation, for instance, trains attentional control and can reduce the frequency of intrusive thoughts. Studies have shown that mindfulness-based interventions lower the rate of psychotic-like experiences in high-risk populations. Finally, professional help. If earworms start to interfere with concentration, sleep, or mood, or if you notice any emergence of auditory hallucinations, seek a mental health professional promptly. Early intervention, especially with cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis, CBTP, can dramatically improve outcomes.
Those are concrete steps. I'm also curious, do you think there's any value in embracing earworms, perhaps using them as a sort of mental warm-up before a focused task?
There's a playful angle to that. Some musicians actually listen to their own earworms to get into a flow state. The key is intentionality. If you harness the loop as a cue, I'm about to start studying, I'll let the tune fade after 2 minutes, you're exercising the very top-down control that protects against runaway cognition.
So, like a mental metronome?
Exactly. Just keep the metronome in time with a larger rhythm, not the other way around.
We asked our audience to tweet us questions. Here are a few that stood out. Tweet 11 from Mindful Mia. Dr. Peterson, can certain genres of music increase the chance of earworms becoming intrusive, like are heavy metal or techno more risky?
The content of the music matters less than its emotional resonance and repetition. A piece that's highly arousing, whether it's a pounding techno beat or a soaring operatic aria, can create stronger prediction errors, making it stick. What's more relevant is whether the music triggers a personal memory or strong affective response. That emotional tagging can make the loop more persistent, so it's not the genre per se, but the personal significance and the level of arousal.
Tweet 12 from Neuronate. Do you think the internet's algorithmic echo chambers could push people toward a schizophrenic kind of thinking by constantly reinforcing prediction errors?
That's a fascinating and timely question. Echo chambers amplify confirmation bias, which is essentially a top-down prediction that the world is aligned with one's pre-existing beliefs. When you are bombarded with information that always fits that prediction, the brain's error correction mechanisms get underutilized, leading to a weakened ability to discriminate between internally generated expectation and external reality. Over time, this can erode the robustness of the hierarchical narrative and make atypical conspiratorial thoughts feel normal. While it's not the same as schizophrenia, there's no neurochemical dysregulation, it does illustrate how environmental structures can stress the same predictive hierarchy we discussed.
Tweet 13 from Sleep Science. Is there any evidence that certain sleep disorders like REM behavior disorder are linked to the frequency of earworms?
Sleep is the brain's garbage collection phase. In REM behavior disorder, the normal atonia that prevents us from acting out dreams is absent, suggesting a dysregulation of brainstem circuits. While the direct link to earworms isn't well studied, fragmented REM sleep does impair the consolidation of auditory memories. This can cause the brain to hold on to incomplete auditory traces, potentially increasing the occurrence of involuntary musical imagery. So yes, there's a plausible mechanistic connection, albeit indirect.
Jordan, thank you for unpacking such a complex web of neurobiology, psychology, and lived experience. To recap, mental health indeed exists on continuous spectrums. Earworms are a window into our brain's predictive machinery, and when that machinery falters through neurochemical shifts, stress, or environmental feedback loops, the line between a harmless tune and a distressing hallucination can blur.
It's been a pleasure, Peter. I'd leave listeners with a simple but potent reminder. Meaningful action, whether it's learning a skill, caring for someone, or simply telling a coherent story about your day, acts as a scaffolding that keeps the mind's paradoxes in check.